What if you had an app, so like DoorDash, a crowdsourcing type of an app, DoorDash or Uber, or one of these commercial apps where you're crowdsourcing deliveries or crowdsourcing personal transportation? What if you had an app that could help you connect with transportation providers? What would you think of that? Was that something that you would be interested in? Because we really had absolutely no idea if something like that would appeal to farmers.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, we meet Dr. Carolyn Krejci, an industrial engineer and expert on supply chain management at the University of Texas at Arlington. She's designing surprising new ways of supporting local and regional food systems. She and NCAT Southwest Regional Director Mike Morris sit down to discuss her pioneering research on food transportation and the ingenious new Crowdshipping phone app that she and her team recently created for matching small farms with drivers who are willing to deliver farm products to urban markets. Could a ride-sharing system for food products expand markets and increase incomes for small farms? Let's listen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Mike Morris, and I'm here today with my friend, Dr. Carolyn Krejci of the University of Texas at Arlington. Our topic today is food transportation, and more specifically, that age-old problem of moving farm products from small and mid-sized farms out in the country, usually, to urban areas where lots of consumers and customers would be happy to buy those products. By way of a quick introduction, Dr. Krejci is an assistant professor in the Department of Industrial Manufacturing and Systems Engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington. And she holds a PhD in industrial engineering from the University of Washington. She moved to Texas about 5 years ago, I believe, and before that, she taught at Iowa State University. About 3 years ago, Carolyn received a grant from Southern SARE, that's the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, for a project that was called Regional Food Transportation for Texas Farmers. And she's just finished that project. So this is all fresh news, hot off the presses. One of the first times that she'll be talking about the results of that project publicly. And by way of full disclosure, I also played a small role in that project, did some of the research, and have been following it closely and very excited about it ever since it began. So, Carolyn, you're probably the first industrial engineer we've ever interviewed for an ATTRA podcast, and maybe you're one of the first ever to receive a SARE grant or a Southern SARE grant. So that's pretty unusual. Maybe just to start, tell us a little about your background, how you came to be interested in sustainable agriculture.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction. That was very kind. So my background, so all three of my degrees are in industrial engineering. And so you may be wondering, what is industrial engineering? Even people within the various fields of engineering don't always know what industrial engineering is. So just to give you kind of a very brief description of that, the way that we often describe ourselves as industrial engineers is by saying engineers make things, industrial engineers make things better. And so industrial engineers do all kinds of things and work in all kinds of industries. But I think a key focus for all of us is on improvement of systems in particular. So taking kind of a holistic systems view, looking at the integration of various components of a system. And that system can be really anything. Industrial engineers traditionally were found within a manufacturing environment. So going into manufacturing facilities and trying to improve efficiency, trying to improve workflow, in some cases improving ergonomics, and that type of thing. But it doesn't, these days, industrial engineers are found everywhere, even agriculture. So in healthcare, in all kinds of service systems, as well as manufacturing. And then my area of interest, which is logistics, supply chain, distribution. So yeah, I would say industrial engineers are focused on improvement of such systems. And what improvement means, now generally that's in terms of efficiency. So that could be cost efficiency, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be in terms of things like we look at improving safety, in my case, sustainability. So we're very, very broad, but improvement, a systems view. And then the third thing, I think all industrial engineers are, one of our common characteristics is working with people. And so looking at how people interact with design systems. So that's a little bit different, I think, in some sense than other engineering disciplines. So all my degrees are in industrial engineering. And then between degrees, I worked at UPS briefly as an industrial engineer. And then I worked at Lutron Electronics as an operations engineer. And in working in both of those companies, I got very interested in supply chains and transportation, distribution, warehousing, that type of thing. So when I decided to go back for my PhD, I knew I wanted to focus on supply chains. And then the question is, well, how did I get involved with sustainable agriculture? And I wish I had some really deep explanation for that. But the truth is that while I was starting to think about going back for my PhD, I was also reading The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. That was kind of my introduction to the reality of agriculture as it is, and kind of for the uneducated like myself at that time, very shocking, very interesting and very shocking. And I just found myself thinking, okay, what can we do about this? And I found myself reading more and more and more on that topic. And then when I started my PhD and my advisor said, hey, what domain would you like to look at? She was interested in sustainability of systems and how we can improve system sustainability. And I said, well, I'm interested in food systems. And she said, great, that sounds perfect. That's where my interest started. And then in my PhD, I looked at food distribution in regional food systems and how to model that using computer simulation. And then when I worked at Iowa State, I did some research projects with the Leopold Center, also looking at transportation in regional food systems, particularly collaborative transportation between food hubs. And so part of one of those projects, we developed, my students and I developed an app that would allow food hub managers in Iowa to communicate with one another when they were sharing transportation. So it would reduce the number of errors, delivery errors that they made. It would help them know what the other managers were doing. And it was kind of a very, very bare bones, scaled down UPS tracking system is the way I describe it. So that was a really cool project. We piloted it. And then since I left Iowa State, researchers there have kind of carried that on and are extending that. And then coming down to Texas, I was really happy to discover that there's a thriving regional food environment here, particularly in Central Texas, but throughout the entire state. And so that was really a welcome surprise, honestly, to me, because I'd never lived in Texas, didn't really know much about Texas, but there was a lot to explore here. So I just started, talking with farmers, going to the TAFCA conference, getting to know people here in Texas, and found that Texas farmers and ranchers face many of the same issues that Iowa farmers and food hub managers face. And so the project kind of sprung from all that.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. And you and I met at the TAFCA conference, Texas Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. And I remember thinking, what the heck is an industrial engineer doing here? But really being glad you were there, and thinking you had an unusual background, something to contribute, and you just come from a very different, you bring a very different skill set. And Michael Pollan strikes again. That's a great story. I didn't know he had made that impact on you as he has on so many people. Well, let's go ahead and dive right into your SARE project. And why don't you go back in time a couple of 3 years and tell us what you were hoping to accomplish. It was a SARE research and education project. Start from the beginning and tell us what you were trying to learn.
Sure. So the previous research that my students and I had been working on at Iowa State, we had discovered what many of your listeners, I'm sure, already know, is that transportation is a huge hurdle for small and medium scale producers. one of the things, with an industrial engineering background, one of the things that we kind of wondering, our overarching hypothesis, I guess you could say, is that we feel that there are some methods and tools and techniques and practices that farmers can adopt from, I guess you could say, conventional supply chains that farmers can adopt to make their own transportation and distribution issues, well, I don't want to say go away, but to improve those systems and make them more efficient and less burdensome. So in Iowa, we experimented with the food hub managers and the farmers and looking at some of those techniques and methods and approaches to see what worked and what didn't work and what had to be adapted to meet the needs of regional food systems participants. And naturally, of course, many of those techniques did have to be adapted. And you might expect that such techniques you would have to meet the requirements of farmers on an economic scale, to say, okay, well, farmers not going to be able to adopt a transportation management system or warehouse management system. I mean, anything that's really expensive, for example. And so certainly that was something we have to work around, but it wasn't just that so much as the very community focused view of regional food systems participants. And that I think I can say all of the farmers, food hub managers, other regional food systems actors that I've spoken with in Iowa and also in Texas and elsewhere are not certainly they're running businesses and they need to make money, but they're certainly not in it just to make money, like not at all. There's all these other social and environmental pieces to it. And so we have to honor that in trying to adapt, the best logistics, best practices of Walmart. I mean, that probably sounds abhorrent to your listeners, but they have good ideas. I mean, that's the reality is they have really good ideas about how logistics should work. So the question is can we take those ideas and adapt them to meet the needs of regional food systems participants and make it work and make things better for transportation and distribution in regional food systems. So that's kind of a long lead into the project in Texas then. The question wasn't so much, do farmers and ranchers have challenges with transportation? I mean, we pretty much figured they did because we kind of knew that from our experiences in Iowa, as well as looking at the literature and all the research reports from extension offices and other sustainable ag centers out there. So there's a lot of work on this topic. And so we knew that it was likely to be a problem. But what we were curious about in this project was, why, I guess to back up, since we know this is a problem, there are a number of good people out there, researchers and practitioners out there who have said, well, hey, if we could get farmers and ranchers to adopt some best practices. So I'll give you an example of one. One would be, being mindful about vehicle adoption. So what kind of vehicle do you purchase for your transportation? Another would be collaboration, whether with other farmers or with, commercial transportation providers. So there's a number of best practices out there that the sustainable agricultural community, both research and practitioners, are aware of, and they know that these are good ideas. And yet the adoption of those ideas and those practices among small scale farmers and ranchers is, as far as we knew from our research, was low, very low. And we had some idea as to why, technological hurdles, economic hurdles, mistrust possibly, but we didn't really know for sure. And there didn't seem to be a whole lot of research out there on that. So we wanted to understand what the farmers in Texas, what their transportation challenges were, but also what they thought could be done to overcome those challenges and get a sense of why, some of these recommended practices, perhaps they had not jumped on. And then we wanted to pitch to them some ideas, some fresh ideas about how they might collaborate with other farmers and with not just other farmers, but maybe other kinds of transportation providers very broadly, to offload the transportation burden. So that's what we wanted to find out was, from the research perspective is how did they feel? How do farmers feel about collaboration? Why don't they do more collaboration for transportation? What could make that work in their view and that kind of thing? So we wanted to explore that. and then kind of suggest to them the idea of, what if you had an app, so like DoorDash, a crowdsourcing type of an app, DoorDash or Uber, or one of these commercial apps where you're crowdsourcing deliveries or crowdsourcing personal transportation. What if you had an app that could help you connect with transportation providers? What would you think of that? Was that something that you would be interested in? Because we really had absolutely no idea if something like that would appeal to farmers. So then we wanted to gather that knowledge from farmers and ranchers here in Texas, and then take what we learned to actually translate that new knowledge into something practical. We wanted to actually develop and pilot some kind of tool that would facilitate transportation collaboration. Now, at the outset, we weren't 100% sure that the farmers would be interested. We thought they would probably be interested in something like this, but we weren't sure. So we went into it knowing, well, they might not want an app for transportation collaboration at all, but we were okay with that. We just wanted to see, well, then, what would they want? But our idea at the outset is if they were interested in that type of thing, we could learn what they were looking for in such a tool and then develop a tool and pilot it. That's exactly what we did. And that's what we did over the 3 years for this project.
For decades, NCAT's ATTRA program has been the trusted place to find practical and cutting-edge answers to sustainable agriculture questions. But what if you're the one with the great idea? The forum on ATTRA's new website connects you with other farmers, ranchers, and land managers who are sharing their practical know-how. Stop by at attra.ncat.org and join the conversation.
That sets the stage perfectly. In a sec, we'll hear how it went and what you did and what you learned. I did want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about Texas. I know, and I spent several years in Texas, as you know, and I believe there's over 30 cities, over 100,000 people in Texas. It's a huge state with all these urban centers, which on paper looks like it should present all kinds of opportunities for a regional food system, for farms to move food into urban customers. And yet, I've seen surveys where Texas comes in, dead last of all 50 states in the development of its local food systems. And they count things like farmers markets, and they count however you measure the development of a local food system. You want to say a little bit more about the unique challenges of Texas?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the challenges that we expected from the outset, based on my conversations with you actually, Mike, and then also with some farmers that we got to know prior to the project and at the start of the project, and just looking at a map of Texas, you kind of expect distance to be an issue because it's a huge state, and so distances between cities, distances between farmers and each other, and farmers and cities are vast. And that's something we anticipated, and it did definitely come up, in our conversations with farmers and the focus groups that we performed with them. But the other issue, I would say equally as problematic, maybe more so, is the kind of that last mile piece. So in urban areas, traffic here is rough. I know that for Dallas, for sure, living up here in the DFW area. Houston is nightmarish. Austin is also nightmarish. And it's just the traffic issues for making deliveries, especially to the urban core. That is a very, very big challenge for our farmers. I'm sure that's true elsewhere throughout the US. So those distances are big traffic and congestion issues. Another one that came up that probably seems very obvious, and I think we anticipated this at the outset, but didn't realize what a major challenge it is the temperature. It is hot here, and particularly in the summer, and temperature control is a really big problem for farmers, especially those transporting fresh produce and of course frozen. And so, not every farmer, in fact, most of the farmers that we spoke with, hardly any of them, I should say, had refrigerated transport. A lot of them are using coolers and air conditioning and, making it work, but it was definitely a challenge, particularly, I would say for our meat producers too, talking about transporting live animals. Heat is a major, major concern. And so that's That's a big one. Absolutely. So those are the ones that come to mind when I think about specific to Texas as far as transportation goes, is distances, urban congestion, making it very difficult to reach urban consumers, and then dealing with the heat.
Sounds like you've got the perfect place to do your project. Texas has more farmers than any other state. They're scattered all over this enormous geographical range. We have lots of urban areas, but they may be 100 or more miles away. And then the other factors you mentioned, congestion, heat. So you can imagine the frustration of producing beautiful farm products and seeing all these consumers and struggling to figure out how am I going to get my food to them and be able to market it to them.
One other thing that is very, very interesting about Texas, and probably, I don't know if it's entirely unique, but I'm not sure that this is true elsewhere. It is both a challenge and I think also an opportunity that I did want to mention, is in that the state is just so huge, especially from north to south. And so seasonality plays an issue. And when we are up here in North Texas, we're sitting up here freezing, not able to grow a whole lot of the early months of the year. Of course, South Texas is just blooming. And so throughout the year, different regions of Texas are able to produce different things and produce at different volumes. And so the idea of being able to share that seasonal bounty throughout the state is really intriguing and really appealing. Looking at Texas as a region, I think that's really cool, but it also doesn't seem to, well, I don't want to say it doesn't happen at all. I mean, the perfect example is citrus. We certainly get citrus from South Texas all throughout the state and throughout the country. But it is a frustration that I heard from farmers in South Texas, for example, is that they would love to be able to share their produce with the rest of the state, but it's just hard to reach people.
Absolutely. That's a very key point. And so we have sort of a microcosm of the whole country, I guess. We have seasonality, we have distances. All right, so tell us, okay, there's the problem. What did you do? How did you approach it? And what did you learn when you started talking to farmers?
When I wrote the proposal for this project, I pitched it as a systems engineering, taking a systems view and approaching it as a systems engineering project to designing some kind of transportation facilitating tool. And so to do that, one of the most important steps, probably the most important step, is to spend lots of time understanding stakeholders' requirements. And so we started, and we've done a little bit of this before the project started, was just getting to know stakeholders, regional food system stakeholders in Texas. So that meant prior to COVID, going out and visiting farmers and ranchers. That was curtailed, of course, but we did get a chance to drive around and see a number of farms, which was very, very cool. And we flew down to South Texas and got to see some farms down there, which was really, really cool for me. So citrus growers, for example, I hadn't seen farms like that down there prior to going down there. So just kind of getting to know farmers, asking them questions, asking them about their challenges in general, asking them about how they perceive transportation as a problem. And nearly everybody, I can't actually think of one person we spoke with that said, oh, transportation is no big deal. Although I guess we did talk to one rancher who's just using UPS to ship frozen meat, and he seemed to be okay with that solution for his particular business. But everybody else said, transportation is definitely a problem. But, farmers face lots and lots of challenges. And transportation is just one of those many challenges. When we asked them about their operations, they would mention difficulty finding sufficient farm labor, marketing, finding customers, all of these things. And transportation was in there. And when we asked them specifically about it, they definitely had things to say, but it didn't always come up as being a priority. So we learned a lot. We learned a lot about the different, if you were a meat producer in particular, the challenges associated with that versus, fresh produce. So just lots and lots of visiting farms, calling people, having, online interviews and just asking them about their transportation challenges and kind of getting a picture of those challenges. And the idea behind that was to learn, and then based on what we learned, come up with a focus group protocol to speak with farmers and ranchers in Texas in groups. And so we did that. And so we conducted 6 focus groups throughout the state of Texas. And because of the COVID situation, we did it all via Zoom, which ended up working out really well, actually, because I'm guessing that more people participated than probably would have if we'd done it in person, just because it's so convenient to meet via Zoom. And it was great because we got participants from all over the state. So we got a lot of really different perspectives, but it was all small and medium-sized farmers and ranchers located in Texas who were currently selling to regional markets, or were interested in doing so, or were interested in growing those markets. So we held those focus groups, and that was not this past summer, but the summer prior, so summer 2021, and asked them, as I kind of alluded to previously, what our research questions were interested in. So we asked them what were the challenges associated with transportation that they faced in their businesses. And there were a lot of variations, of course, between different participants, but there were some strong themes. And the strongest theme, which is probably not terribly surprising, but it was the time commitment. So how much time farmers are spending in transportation, specifically in transporting their product to market. And it was a little bit interesting to me, I guess, that across all of the focus groups and all of even the interviews that we'd done, that cost didn't come up as being the biggest pain point associated with transportation. Money actually didn't, the cost of transportation, the cost of vehicles, cost of fuel, that kind of thing didn't come up specifically. It was more about how much time the farmer was spending on transportation, and would much rather be spending that time on other activities like farming and managing the farm and the things that they want to do. So that was a big frustration for them. The temperature control issue that I mentioned earlier, which is very not just specific to Texas, but is certainly a big issue. So that was a problem that was mentioned both in transit, for sure, while product is on vehicle, but also storage. So the farmers, a lot of them mentioned that having temperature controlled storage on their farms was, many of them didn't have it. So there was this kind of scheduling issue of having to get things harvested and then get them transported very soon after that, because there didn't have enough cooler space. So temperature control was a big issue. Time was a big issue. And the fact that, their customers were really looking for very frequent deliveries, very flexible scheduling, so all the things that customers want and prefer, and how difficult that made farmers' lives, because if they were telling the customers, hey, I can only make a delivery on Wednesday because, I don't want to be spending my whole week driving around. That can be very disappointing to customers, of course, who are not accustomed to just getting all their food at once and an inflexible schedule. So these challenges came up, and they were not all that surprising. These challenges have been established in the research on regional food systems for quite some time. And then we asked the farmers, we kind of followed that discussion by asking them, hey, what do you think about how you could overcome these challenges? And we didn't even prompt them for this, although this is what we were interested in, is that what came out of that was farmers saying, hey, it would be so great if we could work with one another for transportation and aggregation, if we could collaborate somehow to share that burden and share vehicles and share storage space and maybe trade off taking trips to the city. So that came out loud and clear. That was probably the biggest theme that came out of that question. They also mentioned the idea of just outsourcing transportation to a commercial third party. That was something that sounded appealing to them. And so that, again, unprompted, we didn't tell them, hey, this is something we want to ask you about. And then we asked them, okay, well then specifically, what do you think about the idea of collaborating with other farmers? What are the pros and cons that you see? So collaborating with other farmers specifically on transportation, using a third party, outsourcing transportation to a third party provider, some commercial transportation provider, Or, and this was kind of a little bit more innovative idea, kind of getting back to that idea of Uber or DoorDash, what we term crowd shipping solution. What would you think about sending your product to your customer in the city or wherever with an anonymous driver? Someone that you just, post on an app and say, hey, I've got this product. I've got, 6 boxes of tomatoes that we'd like to ship to these restaurants in downtown Houston. Is there anybody out there that would be willing to do that for me on the schedule? And then just waiting and seeing what kind of bids you get back. And whoever it is, as long as they have suitable transportation and they're willing to do it for a suitable price, that you'd be willing to send your product with them. So we pitched that to them. And so what we came back with, and again, some of this a little surprising, some of it not, pretty uniformly across all the focus groups, farmers were not interested in sending their product with anonymous drivers. There was just the trust issue and the feeling that the random person out there is not going to know how to handle product appropriately. And so that was, I think we had one farmer who said, oh, I might be willing to try that. Everybody else is like, no way. And there were also one thing that was interesting that I didn't expect is some farmers expressed concern about personal safety. So having some random person coming out to your farm to pick up product, you don't know who that person is, and concerns about personal safety there. So we hadn't thought about that, but it was a concern that came out. So on anonymous drivers, that was kind of like, no way. Third-party transportation logistic providers, the farmers liked that idea very well. We were surprised that they didn't talk about being concerned about the cost of doing that. And I suspect that that's because they didn't have a good feeling for what the cost of that kind of service would be. So they liked it. They liked the idea of saving time by sending product with somebody else and not having to drive it. They liked the idea that the drivers would be liable for damages or missing products. And they liked the idea that might be able to improve their ability to extend their market reach. So if they have some commercial driver doing the driving for them, they might be able to reach more customers in a broader radius. Then we asked them about the other farmers, and they said, yeah, we'd love to do that. We'd love to collaborate with other farmers for transportation. And some of them reported having done so in the past, and some of them doing a little bit of that right now, just sharing vehicles, taking turns on driving to the market, that kind of thing. So they like that idea a lot. They feel like it would give them the chance to get to know other farmers. They like the idea that other farmers would know how to handle product appropriately. The big challenge with that that came out was the trust issue and the competition issue. They were very concerned about other farmers potentially stealing their customers when they're making deliveries for them. So that was a huge concern. So the trust issue was a common thread through all of that, unsurprisingly. That's what we learned from all those focus groups, and the big takeaways that firstly, that farmers are definitely interested in collaborating with one another, with trusted, I guess you could say trusted community members for sending their product. They like that idea a lot. They like the idea of using an app. That was very appealing to them. And, because I was honestly a little concerned that they might just say, this is a non-starter. We're not using an app to do our deliveries and our shipping. And they were really open to it. So that was on the farmer side. And then would you like me to talk right now about the app research we did, or would you like me to discuss that?
I was just going to ask you, I know you did a deep dive into the mysterious world of crowd shipping platforms. So talk a little about what you looked at and what did you learn about those platforms?
Yeah, so in parallel with the research that we did, interviewing and doing focus groups with Texas producers, my students and I were also looking at existing transportation platforms that are out there, commercial platforms, that will allow what we term a sender. Okay, so someone who wants to ship something. For our project, that would be a farmer or rancher who wants to send product to a customer. So allowing, these companies, which again, I referred to the term crowd shipping, and the idea is that you're crowdsourcing drivers, you as the sender are crowdsourcing what we call carriers, someone driving a vehicle, crowdsourcing transportation providers to make deliveries for you. And so I think many of us have used such crowd shipping services for restaurant deliveries. So DoorDash, Uber Eats, those kinds of platforms are crowd shipping services. But there are other services out there that are not just for restaurant food, but for also shipping freight. Okay. And so that could be packages, that could be larger items, kind of anything, even pallet loads of items. An example that you might be familiar with would be U-Ship. So the idea is, again, that as a sender, you have something you want to ship somewhere and some time frame in mind, and you post that. And you might post, depending on the platform, you might suggest a price, or you might just say, hey, here's what I want to ship. And then you wait and get feedback from a crowd of carriers. And those carriers could potentially be just individuals like myself. I have a personal vehicle that's got space in it. I travel from my home in Fort Worth to Arlington regularly for my job. And so since I'm making that trip back and forth between Fort Worth and Arlington, I have extra space in my car. Would I be willing to carry a package or packages, across that distance because I'm going anyway? Or I suppose I could do that as a side gig, just make those trips on purpose to make money. So that's the idea behind crowd shipping. Again, it could be anything as small as an individual package or a pizza, all the way up to pallet loads of items or larger bulky items. And so there's platforms out there that do that. And you as a consumer can partake, and you probably have in one way or another. So we wanted to explore those platforms and just see, are there any of them out there is there any way that we could make this work for small scale farmers? And part of the motivation, so kind of two branches on this, part of the motivation for this research on existing platforms, one was just to see what was out there and what kind of designs were appealing for an app that facilitated transportation collaboration, give us some ideas. And then the other is actually, as we first started this project, one of the questions they asked me was, well, why are you thinking about developing a new app to help farmers with transportation? Why don't you just use something that exists out there? There's plenty of platforms out there already in existence that you could just use. And so we said, well, that's not a bad point. Let's go look at them and see if any of them can work. So we did that. And so we were looking at specifically transportation platforms out there that were directly connecting senders with transportation providers. And the transportation providers needed to be independent drivers. Those were the particular kinds of platforms we were looking at. So we weren't looking at like UPS, for example. We were looking at specifically these kind of crowdsourced transportation type things where the platform, the app, is making this direct connection between the sender and a crowdsourced transportation provider. So the idea being that you are cutting out a broker, you're cutting out a middleman. There's just this technology connecting the sender and the carrier. And the idea being, of course, that it should be cheaper, should be cost savings there because you're cutting out the middleman. And it in theory anyway benefits both the sender and the carrier, because the sender can ship something more cost effectively. The carrier can maybe fill, if he or she is driving a truck, maybe fill up their truck a little bit more, be a little more efficient, make a little money. If you're an individual non-commercial driver, just again, make a little money on the side, maybe do it during her commute, pay for your gas. So in theory anyway, these systems seem like they could be really useful and potentially useful for farmers. So we started out, my students found 400 through our search. We did an exhaustive search and found 400 transportation type platforms. And then they looked at the websites of all these platforms and kind of narrowed it down through a process of determining some of them were out of business, some of them weren't actually doing transportation, although it seemed like they were. So anyway, kind of did a little bit of sifting and got it down to 80 some platforms that really were doing the kind of thing we were interested in. And then, not just looking at the platform's website, but actually downloading the apps, using them, giving them a try, and by requesting a quote for an artificial shipment. I will say that. So pretending, I guess, to be farmers located in various places throughout Texas and saying, hey, I have this type of shipment I need to make. Will anybody do this for me, and what would it cost? So we ran this experiment. My students did most of the heavy lifting on that. And it took quite some time. And the bottom line, and so we have this describe the whole process and the results in a paper that will be coming out, I think, within the next month or so. And the sad result is that really none of these platforms were suitable. And you might wonder, well, how do we know if they were suitable? Well, we talked to two particular farmers, so one up here in North Texas and one down in South Texas, and asked them to look at some of these apps that we thought would be the best fit, and just said, hey, what do you think about these? And they were like, no, because the quotes we got back were really, really high. For the most part, way too costly for farmers to afford. None of the apps, not a single one of them, gave us back quotes that guaranteed temperature controlled transport. So that was a major issue. You could request it on some of the apps, but again, no guarantee. And none of the quotes came back saying, yeah, I'm a driver that can provide that. So it was kind of I hate to say it was a dead end, because it was very interesting to learn this, that out of all these apps we looked at, none of them really were suitable for small scale farmers to use. So very disappointing, but also made us feel like, okay, what really is needed here is an app that is really geared toward the needs of small and medium scale farmers. The ones that at least the ones we found, there could be some out there that we did not identify, but that the ones that we investigated, that it was very unlikely that they would work for farmers. Now, we did get some ideas about the functions they performed and the design that gave us ideas about, how we might design our own app. So that was also useful. But the bottom line, the takeaway was there's really nothing out there that's suitable.
I love that story, and it's somehow not totally surprising to me that out of all the software and platforms that are out there, nothing really quite met those needs. Do you want to tell us a little more about the app that you have started to create, and what are some of its features, and why can you do something that 400 other organizations were not able to do?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do it. I'm not sure we'll be able to meet that aim, but we did develop a prototype of an app that we, based on what we learned from our study on existing apps, based on what we learned from all of the farmers and ranchers that we spoke with, we designed a prototype of an app. You can't really say it's been tested in the field. I mean, it hasn't been used to actually arrange transportation yet, but we did hand it over. So we created it and handed it over to farmers and had them kind of play with it and experiment with it and give us feedback. So the app we created does or would do just kind of what I was describing, is allow farmers, it wouldn't necessarily have to be farmers, could be other vetted members of the regional food community, to go on this app and sign up and then have their account specify whether they wanted to be a sender only, a carrier only, or you could certainly be a farmer who wanted to be in both roles. And so what the app allows you to do as a sender is, like I said earlier, the idea is just to be able to post a job and a job description, some product, specify the product, any special needs for that product, especially with respect to temperature control, where the pickup location is, where it needs to be delivered, what the timeline is, and just post that out there for other members of the community within this app, potential carriers to view. So if you're participating in the app as a carrier, you can then see any posted job and say, is this something that's appealing to me? And if it is, you can bid on it and say, hey, I'll do this job for $30. So you can post that bid, and as part of your profile on the app, you have to specify what kind of vehicle you have and who you are and that kind of thing. So the idea being that there's transparency there so that the sender and the carrier can know something about each other, and trying to work on that trust dimension that came up so frequently with farmers, the trust that is necessary to send your product with someone else. So the sender then can view different carriers' bids, and at some point they decide, okay, well, this bid is suitable, and they pick someone, one of those carriers, and say, you won You won it's not an auction, but you've won the job. And then work with the carrier. That can be done through the app. It doesn't necessarily have to be done through the app, but the idea is that you can work with the carrier then to arrange the pickup and arrange the delivery. So the key function of this pilot version, this prototype version of the app, is the matchmaking, and of course the bidding. And so the way the app was set up too is that there is an administrator. And of course, on our end, we at UTA, my students and I were administrators for the app. And the administrator decides who gets to join. So it isn't just anybody, there's no anonymous individuals that can join the app. It has to be someone that is approved. But then, so we designed this app. One of my PhD students really did all of that work in AppSheet. And then sent this out, as I said, to about a dozen farmers, had them go through and kind of make fictitious bids, post fictitious jobs, kind of interact with the app and give their feedback. And so I'm an industrial engineer. My students are industrial engineers. We are not software engineers. We are not app designers. I'm going to be totally honest and upfront about that. So we did our best, but we knew that the design was lacking because it's not our expertise. So we did get feedback from some of the farmers like, hey, this is not the best designed app in the world. You can make this a lot more user-friendly. Although some farmers came back and said, hey, this is really simple, really bare bones, but it does the job. This is fine. So we got some good feedback on design for sure. But mainly what we wanted to know is this the type of tool that you would use to seek transportation, to look for opportunities for transportation collaboration, that kind of thing? Do you see this as being helpful? And what other features would you want to see? I should also say, I forgot to mention, one of the features that the farmers did appreciate was the ability to review participants. So both the sender and the carrier can review each other after the transaction is completed. And so that's kind of a little accountability measure, a little trust enhancing measure that we added in there. And so I'll say, we were in the process still of sorting through those results because we got those results fairly recently. But the big takeaway is that the farmers really liked the idea very much. They wanted to, several of them came out and said, hey, how quickly can you actually develop this into something that we can use? Because we would love this. So that was really encouraging. Definitely some ideas about how to improve the design, some features that they would like to see. But overall, they really, really liked it. And so, yeah, we felt like at least as a prototype, at least as a first stab at this, it was actually a pretty decent success.
So I have to ask, Carolyn, are you trying to get rich? Are you trying to make the next Uber or Tinder?
No, no. So the goal here is certainly not commercialization. The SARE project that funded this work is a research and education project. This is a more of a research project. And we certainly sought to learn more about farmers' needs and what could help them with respect to transportation. But we really, one of my goals with this project was to translate that knowledge, into something useful. Wanted to translate that into an actual tool that farmers could use, that farming regional food systems and regional food communities can use, and certainly not a moneymaker. This is not an entrepreneurial effort on my part for sure. And we asked, actually, when we sent the app out to farmers, we asked them, how much would you willing to pay to use this service? Because using, a platform is not necessarily free. Often you have to pay for server space and that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be expensive, but there's usually some kind of fees involved in operations and maintenance of a platform. And if you do have an administrator, whoever that is, if that's someone within the farming community that wants to take on that role, or multiple someones, perhaps that person wants to be compensated for their time. Who knows? So there could be, at least my view is there could be some nominal cost associated with using the app, some kind of platform fee, but it's not something where I envision this as a commercial effort or a money-making effort on our team's part. Not at all.
Great. And I have to wonder, I would assume some of those 400 that did not work was partly because they were designed around being profitable and making money. You designed a system that's built around trust and sharing and trying to facilitate connections between community members. So pretty interesting. Hey, we're running a little short on time, but I want to close it out by giving you a chance to talk about future directions. What's next for your prototype app? If folks are interested, is it limited to Texas? Just talk a little bit more about the next steps.
Sure. So as I said, the app that we developed, definitely a prototype, and I think it could be used in the field as is, but it could certainly be better. And so what we have done is we've started working with consultants who know more about app design than I do, how to make it user-friendly and usable, and know how to make nice app design, come up with a design for us. And so that's nearly done, actually. And then the hope is then to take that design and send it to software engineer or software engineering firm. And that I'm not sure who exactly that's going to be, because we certainly have software engineering students here at UTA who are capable of doing that type of design. So we might do it here or elsewhere, but we'd like to see this app developed in kind of a full-fledged app with a lot more features than what we could offer with our prototype version. And so as to whether this is only suitable for Texas farmers and ranchers, I mean, no. In fact, we really are kind of hoping that as this gets more fully developed, or even the prototype version, we'd be happy to share that with anybody. I think that this concept, this type of app would be completely suitable for any regional food systems. I mean, any farmers or ranchers that are interested in collaborating, working together, working with members of their community to share transportation. I mean, I think that it would be suitable for anyone, anywhere. And so we're very happy to share what we've developed now and moving forward.
Well, I think with that, we'll wind it up for today. And thanks so much, Carolyn, for taking the time to tell us your story of your research and the app that you developed. A lot of times I think it feels to farmers and ranchers as though academics are a little disconnected, or maybe working on things that are kind of theoretical. And it's wonderful to hear about a project that's having such a practical outcome. And I hope we'll see your app or some future version of it wherever we get our apps in the not too distant future. Was there anything else you wanted to add? Any part of the story that you haven't gotten to, or other take homes that you take away from this 3 years of investigation into transportation?
I think that, over the entire project, it was just very encouraging to me to be able to see how information and communication technologies like apps, which I think, we all use, and they're very, very helpful and add a lot of convenience to our lives, but sometimes also get a bad rap for a lot of valid reasons, how you can take that technology and use it to help communities that are like regional food systems that are doing just really, really great things and just need a tool, need something that is on our end is not that hard to develop. And we're really happy to be able to, as university researchers, to be able to take our knowledge of logistics systems and app development and be able to translate that into a tool that regional food system practitioners can use. I mean, it's very, very encouraging to hear how excited farmers and ranchers are to have such a tool. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to next steps.
Great. Well, thanks again, Carolyn, for joining us today and helping us understand or reflect again on those challenges small farmers face in getting their fruits to market, and as well as the opportunities. And it is exciting to think that there may be technological solutions through an app or something else that could finally crack that age-old problem. To our listeners, we'll put some good materials in the show notes, publications Carolyn has written recently, certainly a link to the SARE database where you can read her project report, as well as investigate all kinds of other interesting research that's been done lately on food transportation. Also, I encourage you all to check out the local food systems page of the ATTRA website, where you're going to find dozens of publications, videos, podcasts, all sorts of things on marketing local food, developing value-added food products, business planning, selling to schools, and many, many other topics. So with that, I'll say once again, thank you, Carolyn. It's been fun. And to our listeners, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.incat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.